Welcome to our Genius of the Sopranos series, where we'll be looking to analyze in detail each and every episode of the show. And today, we're looking at one of, if not the most important episode in the entire show. Be sure to check out the previous episodes in the series and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next one. Before we continue, I just want to point out that this series we're doing is pretty much for people who've already seen the show, or at least have seen the episode being discussed, as we won't spend a lot of time going over the plot, and there might be story elements of future episodes discussed and spoiled. Remember when is the lowest form of conversation. For reasons that I will discern in time, College is considered by many to be the most important episode of the series. Even series creator David Chase considers it the best episode, saying it has nothing to do with what came before and nothing to do with what came after, likening it to a low-budget 1940s noir film. And Chase, of course, always wanted to be a filmmaker, not a television showrunner. For sure, it does kind of feel like a bottle episode that is a lot different to what we've already witnessed. The previous 4 episodes had at least 3 concurrent storylines and featured multiple characters. Here, we've zoned in on just 4 characters, Tony and Meadow in their storyline and Carmela and Father Phil in theirs. Christopher's appearance is quite literally phoned in. With only a handful of characters to follow, the episode is able to take it slower and focus on the characters' psyche and interplay rather than have them revolved around a heavy plot. We're only 5 episodes in, but it's remarkable how fully formed the identity of the show feels. You don't have to be top of your fucking class to know what the episode title is referring to. Tony and Meadow drive to different colleges so Med can decide where she wants to go. But at the same time, it's quite a clever title, as it's us who are about to receive an education about Tony. That will be made abundantly clear to you, but in the meantime, Carmela, recovering from a fever, gets a visit from her priest, Father Phil. The two clearly have a fondness for one another. It's established that movie nights are something the two like to do. This time round, they watch Remains of the Day, a fitting film for the evening, as it's a movie about unfulfilled desire, a butler compelled by his obedience to his job not to give in to his desire for a woman. But something is different this time around from their usual Name That Pope nights, aided by Carmela receiving a call from Dr. Melfi, Tony's psychiatrist, who Carm had assumed by this point was a woman. Why would Tony hide the fact that his therapist was a woman if he wasn't sleeping with her, she wonders. And as the night goes on, as the two talk about movies, theology, food, Carm has a breakdown of sorts, revealing to the viewer that she is fully aware of what Tony is and fears for what it means for her and her family, anticipating retribution from the divine for her sins. The priest gives her communion and hears her confession, but the entire subplot is filled with sexual tension, phallic imagery like Carm on her knees in front of the standing priest, and just before the two are about to engage in some satanic black magic, sick shit, fate, or rather Father Phil's overburdened stomach, intervenes, and Monsieur Jughead rushes to the bathroom to puke. Just as Tony dodged a literal bullet while escorting his drunk daughter back to her room, Carmela dodged a figurative bullet when the drunk Father Phil throws up at the crucial moment. Perhaps the show is contrasting the 2 sins in the episode, Tony's murder of the rat who left the life and adultery with a priest, and how Tony will be condemned for going ahead with it, and Carmela is perhaps saved from damnation for not doing it, even though it's through no credit of her own, just mere chance, happenstance. Her breakdown is one of her few moments of true honesty in the show, but her guilt is essentially absolved by Phil giving her communion and hearing her confession, telling her everything she wants to hear. Such an easy way out and a feeding of her narcissism would not be afforded to her when she would cry to the Jewish therapist a few seasons later with similar woes. Compare both mother and daughter in this episode. Carm has internalized her guilt and hidden it deep away to feed her lifestyle of extravagance, and the morning after she has got her defenses back up, clearly in the dominant position to Father Phil, who stumbles around aimlessly apologizing for his behavior. And Carm even has the upper hand over Tony when he comes back, throwing in his face all these insinuations about the priest sleeping over, before unleashing her weapon, her knowledge that Melfi is a woman. It's like she made the decision somewhere along the way in her life to herself, to allow Tony to be a part of her life, and Meadow is the young lady who has yet to make that decision, who tries to reach out to Tony in this episode and establish a truthful relationship, but is swatted away, as we'll discuss. During Tony and Meadow's trip, Tony spots Febby Petrulio, a former rat turned state witness who put away a lot of connected guys. The episode has Tony trying to confirm it's really Febby, all while tracking him, whilst trying to give off an all is well vibe to Meadow. Febby realizes someone is after him and a cat and mouse game ensues between the two, until finally Tony gets the jump on Febby, strangling him for turning rat. It's kind of funny when you think about it that what confirmed it for Tony that Febby was the rat he was looking for was that Febby began making presidential busts, and the one thing he couldn't get right were the big lips, and that's what Tony sees in the guy's office, not to mention the symbolism behind a bust with big lips being sculpted by a rat who couldn't keep his big lips closed. If there's one episode that really encapsulates The Sopranos, it's college. That mundane aspect of everyday life, the regularness of life as Chrissy puts it, is fully on display with story A being a father taking his daughter around to colleges. It's something so real, so grounded, unorthodox for a gangster show, and it's juxtaposed with this storyline being infused with the mafia plotline of Tony's first murder on the show, a cruel one at that. We're looking at Tony's family, and Tony's family, the sacred and the profane. It's all about the contrast, the crispness of the mobster Tony, and the smoothness of Father Tony. The opening shot is quite telling on a rewatch. We fade in with Tony becoming clearer and clearer to us. First we see him on one side, and as the camera swivels around, we see his other side. In other words, we are going to be seeing another side to Tony. We're going to be getting a clearer, less faded idea of what this man is really about. I'm not quite sure I agree with Chase that college has nothing to do with what came before or after. I agree in spirit, but I gotta counsel. There's a lot that college builds on, and a lot that subsequent episodes derive from college. In fact, I would argue that more grand ideas about the show are actually sprinkled in here. Take this exchange between Tony and Med.
Jesus, right under my nose. Think you'd know.
No, Dad. You won't.
Is it too far to suggest that we should add this line to the other clues that Tony actually died in the end, along with the likes of "it won't be cinematic" and "you probably don't even hear it when it happens"? In that Meadow is telling us that we think we know what's going to happen when it's going to happen, but the reality is we don't. And which character better fitting to offer this advice to Tony? The same Meadow who didn't make it in time to save her father, but it was the last thing he saw, rushing into the diner before his brains were blown out. It's not something we've discussed on the channel extensively yet, but the Meadow guardian angel theory purports that, perhaps through Meadow's initial purity until she too is corrupted to the life, that Meadow is a guardian of sorts for Tony. Let me tell you a couple of tree examples. She takes the lamp that the feds had a wire listening device planted to. She wakes up Tony when he comes close to dying in his coma dream. And she would have been sitting at Tony's 3 o'clock, i.e. Tony's left, when they were at the diner, and presumably the angle that the shooter, President Zelensky, came at. That guardian angel theory is given muscle in this episode, what with Febby citing the reason he didn't pop Tony was because he was with his daughter. Although saying that on rewatch, it looks like Febby was just distracted by the possible witnesses. Anyway, we build on the previous episode with Tony's two worlds blending and colliding. As we spoke about in the last edition of Genius of the Sopranos, we're starting to have Tony's home life coming into conflict with his gangster life. AJ having a coming-of-age moment, staring at Tony at the funeral, and now it's the other child's turn, Meadow directly confronting Tony.
Are you in the mafia?
Am I in the what?
Whatever you want to call it. Organized crime.
I'm in the waste management business. Everybody immediately assumes you're mobbed up. It's a stereotype, and it's offensive. And you're the last person I would want to perpetuate it.
Fine.
There is no mafia.
I wonder if her contempt for lawyers is a happy accident or foreshadowing for the fact that she becomes one.
Advertising executive for big tobacco. Or lawyers? Ugh, so many dads are full of shit.
Tony drives like a maniac trying to tail Febby, putting Meadow's life in danger, symbolic for the fact that his family is put in jeopardy for the sake of mob life, not just in a tangible, very real sense, but that there's the threat of losing your family relationships because of the mob. In college, Tony and Meadow have a chance to have the best of father-daughter relationships, loving, truthful, and without barriers. And it starts off great. Tony's honest with Meadow in the car, so she opens up to him about using drugs, telling him that she admitted it because of his honesty with her. However, at the end of the episode, after he's taken his free time on the trip to commit cold-blooded murder, and Meadow can sense something is up, the conversation is completely different. He tries so many tactics to get her to back down. He gaslights her, says she can't be trusted because she was drunk. He feels offended, and you can see the resigned look on Meadow's face. That layer between them that was dropped this episode is now back up. A door has been closed, a check has bounced, and never again will Tony and Meadow have such an honest relationship. It's symbolized in the ducks flying away after Teddy kills Febby. It's already been talked about what this symbolizes in the pilot. "I'm afraid of losing my family like I lost the ducks," Tony tells Milfy. And with his second talk with Meadow in the car, he's actively chosen the mafia life over honesty with his daughter, and thus begins the road of her distancing herself from him. It is so decreed. Carmela laments, "I got a bad feeling. It's just a matter of time before God compensates me with outrage for my sins." And we cut to Febby loading his gun in the parking lot, approaching Tony and Med. It's easy to forget on a rewatch that there was a very real chance that Tony would die in this episode. The threat of death is always over the heads of the Sopranos family, as symbolized by the gun over Meadow in the bar as Tony flogs her off with some college girls. And unless I'm mistaken, that gun is literally a Chekhov's gun. Chekhov's gun is a narrative principle dictating that every element in a story must be necessary, while irrelevant elements should be removed. For example, if a gun is featured in a story, there must be a reason for it, such as it being fired at some later point. And it's as if, like our expectations later being subverted with Tony carrying out cold-blooded murder, that the show is using the Chekhov's gun as an ironic joke, seeing as though the whole episode has a blue balls feel of things never actualizing after being built up. Father Phil and Carmela, whatever happened there. Febby trying to have Tony killed with a shotgun, which never happens. Him trying to shoot Tony with a pistol that he never ends up using. Tony killing Febby with an electric wire, which was not previously established. You know, it's funny that though College has perhaps aged better than most of Season 1's episodes, the part that hasn't exactly retained its impact is the thing it's most famous for. Leadbelly garroting Febby to death feels a bit mild now. Is it sacrilege to say there's even an awkwardness to it? That this fat fuck pounces like a ninja, and the rat has enough time and air in his lungs to have a conversation with Tony with a wire around his neck? Certainly many future hits, the whacking of Bert Gervasi for comparison's sake, would retain more visceral power. But it's The Sopranos that set the very standard against which we may judge this scene, and it cannot be understated how seismic it was for the small screen for Tony to have killed Febby Petrulio. It doesn't matter if you don't think much of it now, so why don't you leave your opinions to whatever the fuck, because the cultural impact of College is what cemented it into the history books. It was the first time a major show had its protagonist straight up murder someone in cold blood. Yeah, there were heroes who were rough around the edges, but straight up murder? Unheard of. The only thing that really came close were tamer and less graphic deaths and actions in network shows at the hands of the likes of Ray Luca in Crime Story, Lombard in Miami Vice, and Robert Davi's character in Wise Guy. And it's the way Tony kills him. The show makes a point to have Tony with his daughter throughout the episode, the thing that is most precious to him in the world, and to show that Febby has a family, a wife, a daughter who will now never grow up with a father. Febby sees Tony with his daughter, Tony sees Febby with his family. The show is really trying to drive home the emphasis on the danger to family before the actual act. And the presentation of the hit is blunt, brutal, and literally in your face. Tony's unhinged glee, the exertion, the spit coming out of his face, the wire cutting into Tony's hands, Febby's wheezing and agonized gasp. It wasn't cinematic. Tony rests a while next to the corpse. You can hear the birds chirping and the grasshoppers' noises. The murder's been done in broad daylight. There'll be people only a few meters away. There's something quite sick about how ordinary the environment is during this kill, done on this beautiful day. Tony's crew would have never even known if he just let the man go and live his life. But for wise guys, the hustle never ends, and Tony went out of his way to kill him. We simply have no excuse to offer him. At the time the show was made, Tony had been involved in murders, but indirectly, and he'd often acted as the voice of reason, blowing up Artie's restaurant to avoid a murder being carried out there, de-escalating against Junior after Brendan's death. It's easy to forget that there were audience expectations that Tony may have gone to therapy and become a better man, but in the words of Melfi, I've been charmed by a sociopath. Because Febby's death is us, the audience, making our bones. We've grown to love Tony Soprano, to be charmed and compelled by his charisma. But would we still accept him, go along with him, and watch a show revolving around him after we see him commit murder? Well, the success of the show answers that question. HBO pushed back at the idea of Tony killing the rat. David Chase recalls an exec telling him, "You've created one of the most compelling characters in American television, and you're flushing him down the toilet by having him kill that guy." Chris Albrecht, one such executive, recalls, "I said, David, you can't do this. He can't kill this guy. You haven't earned it yet. The audience is going to hate him. It's the 5th episode. Wait until the end of the season." And David said to me, "If Tony Soprano were to find this guy and doesn't kill him, he is full of shit. And therefore the show is full of shit." And I said, "Okay, that's a good point." HBO wanted compromise? How's this? They had Chase add the scene of Febby trying to get the two junkies to kill Tony, to make him seem more of a degenerate character. Tony's action of murder without any provocation whatsoever essentially kickstarted the age of the anti-hero, where today you would expect a protagonist to be morally grey, compromised to an extent, in some cases straight up evil, to make him interesting. It would not have been possible without Tony Soprano. Boardwalk Empire, Dexter, Mad Men, Breaking Bad. The heavily flawed nature of the protagonist of these shows owes a lot to Tony. Now it's pretty much a given, but there's plenty of interviews you can find from industry insiders that acknowledge how groundbreaking The Sopranos was. Bryan Cranston, for example, has said that Walter White would not have existed without Tony Soprano. This is why you always see College on top 10 episode lists or the most important episodes ever list, even though outside of the context in which it came about, it might not have quite the impact for viewers who are watching it today. Interestingly, this episode was the only one written by James Manos Jr., who would go on to create the show Dexter, where the main character is literally a serial killer. Matt Weiner, one of the show's writers, would go on to create Mad Men, the show about womanizer Don Draper, and Terrence Winter, another Sopranos writer, would create Boardwalk Empire, in which protagonist Nucky Thompson dances between being a politician and being a gangster. It's like all these threads would come about, the reach of the Sopranos' direct influence, all stemming from the moment Tony took out Febby Petrulio. It's not just television in general that this scene influenced, but The Sopranos itself. After the cataclysmic success of College, Chase now had the freedom to take Tony Soprano in directions none could have anticipated. His hypocrisy, his savagery, his narcissism would go on to reach depths never quite before explored. The quote that Tony reads at the end of the show, "No man can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true," serves as a commentary on Tony's double life, and as the show goes on, Tony would become only more complex, more multi-layered, at times manipulative, at times earnest, at times empathetic, at times trying to better situations for others, only to soothe his own guilt. There's so many versions of Tony, you wonder if he himself even knows who he is. And that is partly where his angst comes from. His two lifestyles are incompatible with each other. He's not a businessman trying to provide for his family who just happens to be involved in unavoidably shady things. He's a fat crook who benefits from the misery of others and is perpetually trying to nullify his guilty conscience. Maybe Father Phil should have had a read of this quote too. There's a lot of gems in this episode. I find it amusing that Tony laments that Febby gets paid to talk in colleges about what a big bad mafioso he used to be. It's like Tony is preemptively roasting the generation of Michael Francesi, Sammy the Bull, Frank Curatola and the like, all former mobsters who essentially became YouTube celebrities, telling stories of their time in the mob. But it's more probable that the model for Febby was Goodfellas protagonist Henry Hill, who, like Febby, got kicked out of witness protection and made many public appearances. Though the actor who played Febby did a great job, I wonder if it was an opportunity to get a well-known mob actor in a one-time role for the show. Someone like the underrated Armand Assante, perhaps, who'd done the Gotti movie for HBO a few years previous. There's a lot in this episode about values, codes, and rituals. Tony tells Febby, "You took an oath and you broke it," which links to Father Phil's oath with the church and Carmela's marriage oath with Tony. The breakage of both threatened here. Communion wine is not supposed to be wasted, and the priest is supposed to drink what's left after the small required amount is poured and drunk, but Phil pours so much, clearly wanting to have a few this night. We've seen our principal criminal characters dance around religious conventions, and college is our first example of a character who is supposed to be upstanding and righteous, having David Chase's cynical gun pointed at them. This video is not really the place to do a full-scale analysis on Father Phil, but I always found him a really weird guy. A real cringe guy, a slimy, freeloading parasite who loved dancing with sexual tension with vulnerable women, and was played perfectly by the actor who unfortunately became less and less prominent as the show went on. He seems to be self-aware too, getting in ahead of any criticism, saying to Carmela, "You think I'm a schnorrer, don't you?" Carmela would later give Father Phil, in a future episode, a put-down which highlights her hypocrisy as much as it does his, but I never really liked that line, because it always felt like it was a character description that the writers wrote, rather than something a character would organically say. It's like it's summing up Phil in a way that would be better left unsaid. But we can talk about that more in a future Genius of the Sopranos episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out. The priest is hilariously ambivalent, uninterested even to Carmela's questions. A theological query from her might be retorted with a "Can you pass the cheese?" from him. He makes a positive reference to Islam, saying it gets a bad rep in the current climate. He gives calm Buddhist advice. He uses Yiddish language. It's like the guy's true calling, along with his fascination with film, really lies outside of the church walls. It's funny that Tony calls his mistress Irina before he calls his wife Carmela, and Irina makes a reference to a knight in white satin armor, which would later be an episode title. It's likely a malapropism combining the term knight in shining armor with the song Knight in White Satin, but it's an apt visualization of Tony as a character. He's a knight, the strong silent type, a masculine warrior. We're soldiers, as he tells Melfi, but behind the facade he's actually wearing white satin armor, weak, having panic attacks, seeing a therapist, becoming jealous over petty things. So I think we'll leave it there. This was a pretty long video, but an important episode we've taken a look at today. Are there any other details about college I've missed? Do you think the episode and Febby's death still holds up? Let me know in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the Genius of the Sopranos series. Consider supporting me by becoming a channel member or patron, and thanks for watching.